Hi, good morning or afternoon, depending on where you're at. Thank you so much for joining us on this webinar. My name is Hans Wall. I'm an attorney with Jimerson Burr. I'm board certified through the Florida Bar in condominium and plan development, which means the Florida Bar considers me an expert in this area of law. And this is 80% of what I do is within the community association industry. I'm full service in that area, meaning I handle it all from the day-to-day operational needs to the complex litigation that may arise from time to time. So you name it, we do it. And I'm going to turn it over to Fiona for her to introduce herself as well.
Thanks, Hans. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Fiona DiDomenico, Senior Vice President with Castle Group. Thank you to all our board members for joining this afternoon. Hope you guys all had a quiet, peaceful Memorial Day weekend. Wanted to take a minute just to say thank you. I know that none of you thought when you volunteered to be on the board that you'd become pandemic experts, and yet here we are. I know we've all been attending lots of webinars and we've learned a lot. Our goal today for Hans and I is to hopefully answer some of your questions and help make your job easier. For those of you that may not be familiar with Castle Group, we are a privately held management company. We specialize in associations like yours in the state of Florida. We manage about 300 associations across the state, both homeowners associations and condominium associations, towers, walk-ups, mid-rises, HOAs. Most of our associations have some type of staffing on site. So typically they're larger scale or more complex associations. We do full food and beverage management as well. So many of our associations would be highly amenitized. They would have full scale restaurants. We've got lots of towers that also have some type of a food and beverage element as well. And we look forward to answering your questions. If you have a specific question that might be very unique perhaps to your association or your county, and we don't get to that question on today's webinar, don't worry, just email us at info@castlegroup.com and Gianna will follow up with you and make sure that we connect you with the right person to get your question answered. So we look forward to answering those questions, and Hans, I'll turn it back to you and you can get us going.
All right, thank you, Fiona. I appreciate that. And as Gianna and Fiona said, this webinar is meant to help associations coming out of the COVID-19 quarantine lockdown that we've all been in. And so we're going to discuss issues such as enforcing emergency powers during the reopening phase, which includes reopening of the common elements, of course, the rescheduling of meetings and elections, and some issues that may arise there. Also handling collections during this time, and we'll get into some of the unique situations that associations and their members may be finding themselves in at this time. And just a few other issues towards the end that we'll cover. And I'll do my best to answer all the questions that have already been submitted. But as Fiona said, feel free to submit more. And I'll do my best to leave time at the end to address any questions that you may have. But let's get right into it because we only have an hour. So, I want to start with going over the current state of where we're at with the law, because there's been a lot of executive orders entered by Governor DeSantis over the past 3 months. And so I thought it'd be good to at least start off by providing an overview of that. So the declared state of emergency was entered on March 9th. And then a DBPR order was entered, which said that the emergency powers within the Condo Act and the HOA Act are now in effect and do apply in this situation. And so the latest executive order from the governor has extended the declared state of emergency to at least July 7th. It may be extended beyond that, but as of right now, it's at least to July 7th. So the emergency powers that the board has within the HOA Act and the Condominium Act are in effect at least until then, and will be through the duration of the declared state of emergency. Where we're at now is we're in phase 1 of the reopening process, and I'll go over what that entails. Just hang with me on this because it's going to be relevant to the discussion we have regarding the reopening of common elements for the associations. I think it would be good to start off with where we're at in society in general in the state of Florida, and compare that with some things that associations should be mindful of going forward. So I'm going to run off a list of where we're at with the governor's current executive orders. So Restaurants, retail stores, museums, libraries, things like that, you can open up to 50% capacity. Gyms can now open up to 50% capacity as well, so long as they implement safety measures such as social distancing requirements for any classes, and have the capacity, and also have available cleaning supplies for the patrons to do self-cleaning. Vacation rentals, the governor is allowing those to be reopened on a county by county basis. He's leaving it up to the counties. So the counties can apply to reopen to the executive branch that's being handled by the DBPR. If you go to the DBPR website, there's a list of counties that are able to now do vacation rentals. I know that's important to some condominiums and HOAs, depending on where you're located. I just checked the DBPR website about an hour ago, and it looks like there's about 30 or 40 counties that have already been approved to reopen. So now there's still, even with that being said, there's still a mandatory 14-day quarantine for anybody that's coming into Florida off a cruise ship or from some area that has a significant amount of COVID-19 cases. There's still the social distancing requirement of 6 feet, and you're still supposed to avoid large groups. So gatherings of 10 or more people are discouraged. There's still a mortgage foreclosure suspension through the executive orders of the governor. And that has been extended to June 2nd, which is actually a week from today. Now that may be extended again, it may not be, I don't know. We'll just have to play that by ear. Now the order doesn't specifically mention association lien foreclosures. It only mentions mortgage foreclosures. But I can tell you that many of the circuit courts around the state have addressed this by suspending the filing of all residential foreclosure actions at this time. So, if you're in a county where your circuit court has done that, then your association won't be able to do that if you were inclined to do so. Now, something else to keep in mind is on the federal level, there is some discussion in Congress of doing a nationwide stay on debt collection. Whether that happens or not, we'll just have to wait and see. And if it does, whether it's limited to just the duration of the declared state of emergency, or if there's some type of time deadline, such as 90 days or 120 days, we'll just have to see. Right now, nothing's been passed. Last I heard, they were just talking about in a new bill doing that. And so if that were to take effect, it would apply, obviously, to the collecting of past due assessments. So it's just something to keep in mind, something to be mindful of, check the news on as the days and weeks go on.
Hans, if I can just mention on there too, and specifically for that, the debt collection stay, there is a lot of discussion out there about how detrimental that would be to the day-to-day running of, an HOA or a condo, and that it's yes, it's a debt, but it's not, consumer debt. It's to keep the association being able to function. So there are people out there that are trying to educate everybody so that hopefully that doesn't happen, but it is definitely being discussed. I agree. We all have to keep our eyes on that for sure, because that could really hurt us. Yeah,
you're absolutely right, Fiona. And it's hopefully it won't be abused, but as we know, things often are abused. But what it would be meant to do is it's not a stay on paying the debt. It's so it's still come due. You still need to pay your bills, but it's if you're in the unfortunate situation where you've been laid off or your business has been shut down, it would be a stay on actual debt collection. And now it could be abused where people now know if there's a stay on debt collection, then I don't have to pay, and then I don't have to be subject to a collection action until that stay is lifted. So it could be abused. Hopefully that's not the case, but you're exactly right, Fiona. That could be detrimental to associations who need this to literally keep the lights on. So the emergency powers, if you go to the Condo Act and the HOA Act, I'm sure many of you board members and managers have done that during the past 3 months. There's a whole list of stuff that really the most relevant to this current situation is the ability to cancel and reschedule meetings or to conduct meetings as practicable, meaning you can do them through conference calls or online through Zoom or other video applications over the internet. And then also, obviously, you have the power to close the common elements for safety or health concerns and to reopen them as each association deems fit. And so let's talk more about that. Let's transition into the reopening of the common areas. So as I just mentioned, right now we're in a declared state of emergency. It's going to last until at least July 7th, if not extended. And during that time, associations have the authority to close and or reopen as they see fit their common elements. And there's no mandate out there either way saying you have to close or you have to open, or if you do open, here's how you do it. It's a case-by-case basis up to each association based on the characteristics of their association. And I'll give you some things to think about as we move forward in this presentation. But reopening doesn't have to be all or nothing. It doesn't mean that if you reopen, every single thing has to be reopened all at once. An association can open up some areas, but not others. So you may feel comfortable reopening the outdoor common elements, maybe the pool, maybe the basketball courts or tennis courts, but maybe you don't feel comfortable reopening the clubhouse or the gym. That's something that each association can decide based on the unique characteristics of its property and of its membership. Many of you are probably experiencing the situation where many of your members are getting restless and they're voicing their displeasure at having a continued closure of the common elements, and they want them reopened. But you got to find that balance. And so you can reopen them, but what I would say is you want to make sure you do so with caution and that you're safe in the way that you do it. And I think a great way to do that is that if you're reopening, you should mimic the governor's executive orders. I mean, that's really would be the best way to do it. We're in a phase reopening. We're in phase 1, and that has certain language as far as occupancy at 50%. And then as we get into phase 2 or phase 3, that's going to change. But that's what I would recommend you do as an association.
Hans, I can add there too, just for our members, we've seen some comments come in about, I see the building down the street or the community down the street has reopened, their gym, but we're not comfortable reopening ours, for example. And I think to your point, Hans, every association is unique, right? Some people's gym is huge and has, hundreds of pieces of equipment. Other associations could have a gym that's, 6 by 12, and it's really just a small room, and it's got 3 or 4 pieces of equipment, much harder to social distance in that particular circumstance. So it's good to get the information, from what the community down the street is doing, but don't just assume that their setup is the same as yours. You definitely want to look at your particular situation, and then for sure speak with your management company and your association attorney to make sure that you're, got all your dots, what is that? I's dotted and T's crossed, as we say. I was going to say it backwards.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Fiona. And that's why there's no one size fits all mandate out there. And as this presentation continues, you're going to see, I don't have this magic solution, one size fits all answer for you. It's a case by case scenario. I can give you some best practices and things to think about, but you're exactly right. I mean, if you're an association that's miles away from the nearest gym, well, maybe that is a reason why that association may want to open on a limited basis. But if you're an association that right across the street, there's a gym that's open to 50% occupancy, then maybe you don't want to. And then another consideration is your membership. I mean, are you an age 55 older community? Are you a community that has a lot of families with young kids? Are you a community that is geared more towards young professionals? Depending if you're a condominium, depending on where you're located, your membership really could take on just a certain identity based on those members. And so these are all things that you need to think about. But that's why
one of the questions, that came in was, can we open the pool and the gym but not the clubhouse? So I think the answer we're saying is, yes, with the proper checklist going through as to the reasonings why, and of course check with your attorney to make sure that everyone's on the same page there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have discretion to open up what you want as far as a common element goes at the pace you want to open it up. And if you don't want to open everything up, you don't have to. Absolutely consult with your attorney or association attorney before opening anything up. And I'll get into some best practices. I mean, I'll transition into that right now. But the point of what I was saying is the association really should follow the state's lead on this. Don't get too far ahead of what the state's doing. And, I mean, here's an example of restaurants and libraries can open up at 50% occupancy. Then if you open up your clubhouse, you really should be doing the same, 50% occupancy, and the same for a gym. If your association opens at 100% occupancy, You just open up and that's it, and there's no guidelines. And let's say, God forbid, someone falls ill due to COVID-19. It could be a difficult defense if a legal action were to ensue. It could be a difficult defense as to why your gym opened up at 100% occupancy, where the gym down the street, based on the governor's order, was only opened at 50% occupancy. So these are just some things that you need to consider and think about. And the point is, because you got a fiduciary duty, right? If you're a board member, you have a fiduciary duty to the members and the property to protect the health and safety. And so you need to consider that when doing things such as either shutting down common elements or reopening the common elements. But if you do want to reopen some of the common elements, that's fine. What you need to do is you need to make sure it's clear and it's in writing, so there's no confusion and everybody knows what the rules are. So you need to pass a board resolution or some type of board policy or emergency rules and regulations, whatever you want to call it. The point is, it just needs to be memorialized in writing. It needs to be passed properly at a properly noticed board meeting. And then you need to post it conspicuously on the property, just like you do a meeting notice, and probably more so. I mean, it doesn't do much good to have these safety measures in place if they're not posted so everybody can see them. So post them on the windows, the doors, inside the clubhouse or the gym as well. And, you know, your policy here, I'll give you a rundown of some things that you should consider in a board resolution or a policy if you're going to reopen your common elements. Maximum occupancy limit in terms of number of people, and it should equate right now to 50% because that's what the governor's order says. Maybe you want to do limited hours, that's fine, you have the right to do that. Social distancing guidelines, 6 feet apart, that's still part of the governor's order, and I will admit that's extremely difficult to enforce, and you know, you're not going to find really any authority figures that are going to enforce that strictly. But what you need to do is you at least need to show that as an association and a board, you're directing your members to do the right thing. I mean, you got to be able to show that to reduce risk and liability. So,
sorry, in that aspect, boards are often asking if they don't have a facility where it would normally be manned, right? So some of the clubhouses, traditionally, they would have staff anyway, but a lot of our associations may not, you know, may just have a freestanding gym that's key fobbed and there's never any staff there. So what we're seeing is people doing exactly what you're saying, which is the board, you know, adopting clear guidelines, posting right on the door, the occupancy for this room is, you know, 30 people, and due to COVID, it needs to be 15 or less, you know, to self-police that. Is that enough if the association does that? What is your thoughts?
yeah, I mean, look, that's better than nothing. And to your point, Fiona, every association is different and better equipped to handle this. I mean, some have the infrastructure and the facility where it's not difficult. I mean, maybe there's an employee there that they can easily make sure there's not more than 50 people in the clubhouse or whatever the number comes to, and that people are not moving the furniture and staying socially distanced. But some associations, to your point, they just don't have the infrastructure or the facility or the ability to do that. And so those associations may not want to reopen if that's the case. And that's why it's a case-by-case basis. And I'll keep saying this, unfortunately, there's just not one magic answer that fits all associations equally. It's something that every board member and manager needs to evaluate based on the unique characteristics of their association and what they're able to realistically do. But at the very least, that's why you put it in writing and you pass it and you keep it in the minutes and you keep it as part of the official records and you post it. And what I'm talking about is a board resolution or emergency policy that lists that out, because at the very least you need to do that. I mean, you need to think about at least taking some precautionary measures and doing what you can to show that you're doing your best regarding the fiduciary duty that you have, protecting the health and safety of the members. So you have to at least take steps like that to show that that's what you're doing if you decide to reopen. Some other things to keep in mind would be, maybe enforcing if you're a condo, enforce a rule that only one family or one person can be on the elevator at a time. Post that on the elevators. Members need, if they're going to come to the gym, open to 50% occupancy, they need to bring their own towel. They need to bring their own sanitizing equipment. And it's a requirement that if they use a machine, they wipe it down afterwards. Now, what I also recommend is in your written policy or board resolution, however you want to do it, you include language in large, bold font that makes it clear that members are using these facilities at their own risk. That the association cannot guarantee the the health of every single person that enters that building, and that there is some risk to entering, and that so some disclaimer language like that needs to be on what it is that you post on the common element property. And maybe you also want to install hand sanitizing stations on your common property if you haven't already done so. So if you have a large clubhouse, a large gym, and you don't have that, maybe order a couple and install them in there. Every little thing helps to reduce the risk and any liability, and just to show that you're taking efforts to protect the health and safety of the common areas and the members. And here's something else to think about is consider having your members or the tenants sign a release of liability and a hold harmless agreement in favor of the association as a requirement to re-enter those common areas. I can tell you that I've done several over the past 2 to 3 weeks for some of my clients. It's just an extra step to help reduce the risk and liability of if the worst case scenario happens and someone falls ill, and it can be traced back to common element property or some event that took place. Something that you need to think about, and this may not apply to every association, but your association's insurance policy, there could be an exclusion for communicable diseases, which means that if someone were to fall ill and it could be traced to the association property, that may, and let's say there was some type of legal claim brought, that could be an exclusion, meaning there's not insurance coverage. So your members would be on the hook for paying for attorney defense on such a claim. And then if there is some type of settlement, the members would be on the hook for that, which could more than likely end up being a special assessment or several. So that's just something to keep in mind. I know on one hand, it's a difficult position being a board member. And as Fiona said at the very beginning, when you guys signed up for this, it's hard enough at being a volunteer position. You're not getting paid for this, and you're having to deal with all the personalities in your community. And now all of a sudden this pandemic was thrown in your lap, and you're trying to figure out how to handle that. And you have members that want these common elements reopened, and they want to get life back to normal, but you got to balance that with the health and safety of the property and the association and its members. And so having members sign a release or hold harmless agreement is just one added step to do that. And it's just something you need to think about. And now I know probably all of you in attendance are thinking, how on earth is my association going to be able to enforce all of this? A maximum occupancy, social distancing, having members sign release or hold harmless prior to entering. Well, it goes back to what Fiona and I just talked about. It may be easier for some associations to do it than others, and that's just something you need to consider when you're making a decision for your specific association on reopening. And it could be a situation where you just don't have, it's just impossible to ensure that everybody who enters signs a release or hold harmless agreement, but you can at least try. You can at least have one drafted up and have your manager or whoever there is on site do the best you can to have people sign those who enter at their own risk. But these are just things that you can do. And as I said, there's not one magic answer that's going to fit for everybody, but these are just suggestions on things you can do to managing the reopening. I mean, it's going to be with some risk, right? We're in this whole situation because of the risk of falling ill. But as long as you follow the governor's orders, the governor's allowing things to open at 50% occupancy, as long as you follow that and don't get too far ahead of it, and you just take common sense, intelligent steps, such as putting policies in writing, posting them, doing things like that, then you're at least going to do what you can to facilitate this reopening process.
And we are seeing, Hans, just so that people know,
Yeah.
we are seeing an array of things happening across the associations. So, some associations maybe that do have, an office on site when people come into the club facility, they are requiring them to, sign a waiver. Other associations that have that same setup are not requiring any waivers. I've seen associations e-blast out as part of their regular communication saying, hey, the amenities are going to open, please read this release. They're not actually asking them to sign it, they're asking everybody to read it. Other associations are just, doing the e-blast saying, the amenities are opening. Here's what the rules are. The rules will be posted, but there's no waiver. So I think, again, to your point, what we're trying to drive through here is every association is unique, and definitely speak with your management team and your attorney before, opening up and just throwing caution to the wind per se.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the point of what we're getting at is what you should not do is just a blanket reopen and, hey, everybody we're back to life normal.
Don't put your head in the sand. That's never a good defense.
Yeah, I mean, it would be great to be able to do that, but unfortunately that's just not the current state of the world right now. And this is just, this was said at another presentation I did, and I agree with it. 6 months from now, if, worst case scenario happened and someone in your association came down with COVID-19 and hopefully it didn't spread, but it's maybe stayed contained, but nonetheless, someone got ill. What do you want to be able to say you did so that if they were to lawyer up and there's some type of legal claim, what are you going to be able to say you did to carry out your fiduciary duty and to protect the association? And, let's talk about the two extremes. On one hand, if there's nothing, you just, hey, we're open, everybody go have fun. Well, you're not going to have really much to hang your hat on a defense to that, right? But on the other hand, if you're doing some of the things that Fiona and I have talked about, memorializing an emergency rule and regulation or policy, and you're posting it, and you drafted up a waiver and release, and whether you're just sending it out, mailing it, or emailing it out, or you're actually having people sign it, just things like that. These are things that you'll be able to show, look, this is what we did. And by the way, we were following the governor's orders. The governor said these things could be opened at 50% capacity, and that's what we were doing. So that's what you really need to think about. I mean, look, nobody wants to be in this situation, and being a board member is a thankless job. If you make everybody happy, you're probably doing it wrong. Look, this is apparently the world that we're in right now. And so what you should be mindful of is your fiduciary duty, and keep that in mind. 6 months out, if something were to happen, the worst case scenario, what are we going to be able to say that we did to eliminate our risk or our liability? So that's just something to keep in mind. Hopefully you all can still see me. My lights in the office are on a timer. If I don't get up and move around.
We can see you. You're good.
Okay.
We did have a couple of questions that came in from Tiffany. She just kind of typed them in. And she says, is there a handout or a packet that we could get via email to help keep all the information from this webinar on hand? So the answer is yes. I think Gianna is our business developer. She is hosting this with us, and she's keeping track of all of these. So she'll get anything sent out that is requested. And we also have what we call the Castle Playbook. We had one for closing amenities, and it's kind of a guide. We did one for opening the amenities up, and it gives you some general guidelines. So we'll make sure that that's available for everybody. And any questions anyone has after the webinar, certainly they can email at info@castlegroup.com, and we will follow up with you individually on that. Then we had a question that came in regarding emergency powers, and it says, does having emergency powers protect the association board from a petition to recall at the moment? And the example is community members disgruntled about keeping a pool closed and want to remove the board members in retaliation. What are your thoughts, Hans?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I haven't really heard it put that way. I would say no, because the reason is the emergency powers is just one section of the statute, and it is what it is, and it doesn't say anything in there about protecting a board member from a recall during an emergency situation. So there's another section of the statutes that provide the recall procedures, and it says that the members have the right to recall board members if they get a majority vote in favor of doing so, and there's nothing in the emergency powers that provides a stay to that or cancels that out during a declared state of emergency. So it's a great question, but I do not think that there is anything that would stop that from happening right now. So if the members, 50 50.01% of them felt that they needed to recall a board member, and they did it, then that board member is going to be recalled. That's a good question.
Great question, yeah.
So how about, let me transition into the rescheduling of meetings and elections, because I know that's another big topic in addition to the reopening of common elements. So obviously during the stay-at-home period, all board meetings, member meetings, the elections, all of this was for the most part canceled. I know some have been doing conference calls and Zoom meetings, and that's what you're allowed to do under the emergency powers, which is fine. And if you haven't already done so, if your association hasn't done so, I would say now is probably the time. If you historically had quarterly meetings or monthly meetings and they have been canceled, maybe you need to think about start doing them either through a conference call or through some type of online video application. Just keep in mind, I know the longer this continues, where we've got competing laws, basically, right? We've got the law that says you must have an annual meeting and election. And then we've got the governor's orders that says, you can't have large groups, can't have large gatherings, social distancing. And the longer this goes on, if it was only 2 months or so, we could figure out how to comply with everything in the second half of the year. But the longer this goes on, and hopefully there's not a second wave of this, but eventually, you got these competing laws, right? What do I do? I've got to do an annual meeting and election every year, but we can't have large gatherings. You got to find a balance, right? And there may be some creative things that you can do. I mean, we'll talk about the election in a minute. As far as just regular meetings go, if you haven't done so already and you feel like your association needs to have a meeting, whether it's a board meeting or a member meeting, go ahead and either do it via conference call or via video online application. And as long as your notice, I mean, it still has to be open to the members, right? And the members have the opportunity to attend. So as long as your meeting notice has, if you're doing a conference call, as long as it has the number to call into and the access digits and all that, or if you're doing it online, as long as it has the link and whatever it is you need to access that, sort of like how we're in an online meeting now, go ahead and do that. I mean, some associations have done that. I've attended many. I know some still haven't, but if you feel like you need a meeting, don't hesitate to do that. I mean, it's better than not having a meeting.
I would say most associations we're seeing now, Hans, they are doing the meetings, and it's I'd say it's a combination. So typically, probably 50-50. Some of the board members, if they have a facility where the room is large enough that if there's less than 10 board members, that the board members can meet together and be in one room and be socially distanced. And then they're having the members either phone in or like you said, do it via video conference. And I really think that's one of if there is a silver lining in all of this, it's one of the silver linings, in that getting participation at some associations has been tough, and you want resident participation. And so this has made given everyone a little bit of that push to get more comfortable with technology, and it's engaged the community on another level. So that actually can be a good thing. And we're seeing people get much more comfortable with it.
You're exactly right. I mean, this situation has probably changed the world in a number of ways, and that is we're being forced to all get comfortable with technology. And you never know. I mean, this may be the way a lot of associations move going forward. I mean, if it helps you if you notice your attendance is up because people now don't have to go somewhere to attend a meeting, they can just open up their computer. Yeah. Maybe this is how you want to start doing it. Now, I know it has its own challenges, right? Technology issues, someone is muted and you can't hear them, or people are talking over each other. But I mean, hey, if this helps drive up, I mean, apathy is something that all associations face, right? And so if maybe having meetings through applications such as this, if this drives up your attendance and helps you to have that quorum you haven't had in 3 years, then maybe this is something you want to utilize going forward. So yeah, I think in a number of ways, this probably will change the way business and communities operate going forward, at least on some level. But so let's talk about elections, because what are you to do if you've, there's some documents out there that provide your annual election and meeting is supposed to be on March 31st of every year. And, what do you do? Because you couldn't do it. And so you had to cancel your election, and now you got to reschedule it. But at the very least, like we said, the law says you're supposed to have at least an annual election. So what are you to do? Well, as Fiona alluded to, I mean, some of the associations I mean, look, you could probably accomplish this and still comply with the governor's orders. I mean, you're not supposed to have gatherings of more than 10 people, but either at an association office or at the management company's office, you could have the CAM, the board, and your independent election committee that the law says you need to open the ballots and tally them, right? You could probably have them all in a room, social distancing around a table with the computer up, and you could have your online meeting via Zoom. And so if you have your members, you mail out your notices with the ballots and in the envelopes, and you go through the whole statutory election procedure. You have them mail them either to the association office or the management office like you would do anyway. Then they can be received, and you could still, the law requires that the ballots be opened and tallied and opened by that impartial committee, and you can still do it. It's just instead of sitting in front of you, it's through a screen, and so it's still open and transparent. And hopefully this doesn't happen, but if this continues and there's a second wave and now we're pushing up against the end of the year, this might be how you have to get your election done. And so it would be an online meeting like any other meeting, but you would just have the people that need to be in a room, the manager, the board members, this impartial committee. You have them in a room with their computer and everybody can see what's going on. And they're in the background opening the ballots and tallying the votes. And in my mind, you've complied with the spirit of the statute, right? It says it's got to be open and done in front of the members, and you're doing it, and you're also complying with the emergency governor's orders that are out there if they're still continued. So that's just something to think about. So does it make it challenging? Yes. Does it make it a little more difficult? Does it make it a little more uncomfortable? Does it give maybe some of your disgruntled members more of a reason to be even more disgruntled if they think things aren't going properly? Yeah, I mean, it opens the door to all of that happening, but we just got to work with the situation we're in. And at least that's a way that you can comply with the law on doing elections every year. And then also with the governor's orders, depending on whatever state of emergency we're in, a month from now, 3 months from now, 5 months from now. So just something to keep in mind. There are workarounds, and that's what the emergency powers and the statutes are for. I mean, that's why it says you have the power to cancel and reschedule and conduct meetings as is practicable, and that's what we're, it might be what we have to do here. So that's would be how I say that, in this situation that you would handle the rescheduling of meetings and elections. But like I said,
and we're starting to see now, like I said, board meetings have been happening. Probably pretty much every association I think we have now is back to doing board meetings in the new normal. And we had a few annual meetings happen right as COVID was, first starting and things were starting to shut down. And we had to get very creative in those ones where we did, drop off of ballots, outside, social distance, people with masks. I think we had one that even did the opening of ballots, outside so more people could gather comfortably to watch if they wanted while they had it over Zoom as well, in the same area by the clubhouse. So it's definitely, people are starting to get into the new cadence of what we're going to have to do. So it just takes a lot of planning, that's all.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Fiona. I mean, you don't really have to use technology. You could be outside. The only risk there is you have your 20-minute Florida monsoon that shows up out of nowhere, and Murphy's Law, that's going to be the date and time that you scheduled your election. But yeah, so hey, I mean, get as creative as you can and still comply with the emergency orders and also the law, and that's why it's important you consult with your attorney. I mean, there's ways around this. There's ways to comply. Every association is a little different, as we've been saying, based on the characteristics. And so that's why you'll need to consult with your attorney, because your specific association may have something that requires something else to consider that your attorney would know about. So don't do any of this without consulting with your manager and your association attorney. But the point of what we're saying here is we're just having a discussion on some ways to get through this, to reopen, to manage this, and to get through it. But nothing should just be taken at face value. You still need to consult with your manager and your attorney for things that may be relevant to your association. They may not be relevant to another association.
And Hans, we had a specific question from Anne. I think I'm just going to jump to it because it's very timely. I think we pretty much answered it for her, but she said, can you have an election with paper ballots if members are attending the annual meeting electronically, and who counts the ballots? So I think, Anne, hopefully we covered that for you. You can do a combo, basically, right, is what we're saying. And people can drop, ballots off, beforehand, et cetera.
Yeah, and that's true, and that's really one thing that I may have overlooked here, and that's the fact that the statute allows online voting. I think one reason why it wasn't really on the forefront of my mind is because to do online voting 100%, you have to have 100% consent from your members. So that's what the statute says, right? So the members have to consent,
right,
or they can opt out. And so
unless you allow both, essentially.
Yeah. So unless you have 100% of your members that have consented, which would be a miracle, I don't think any associations that ever
if you do, we want to know who you are.
Right. Yeah. What are you all doing? So you're going to have this hybrid anyway, where some people are going to have paper ballots. So what Fiona and I were trying to convey was, here's some creative things you could do with the paper ballot portion of that. So to answer Anne's question, if you all do online voting, that's great. For those who still want to do paper ballots, some of the suggestions that Fiona and I brought up could be utilized for that. You can either have them mail your ballots to your office, and you can do them outside, and you still got to notice that and have people show up. It's got to be open, or you can do it online through Zoom or other applications. So you could still, you could still satisfy the requirements by doing it that way. I'd like to transition to collections because that's going to be an important topic as well. So unfortunately, many of your members may have lost significant income, whether their businesses have been shut down, or they've been laid off, or they've been furloughed, and the bills are piling up, such as assessments, and they're just not able to pay everybody this time. And so as a board, you may want to be mindful of that and empathetic to that, and you may want to also enact some temporary policies to address that, as far as collection options, things like that. So you can't waive assessments. You can't do that. The budget is established, and whether you do monthly, quarterly, or yearly assessments, they are what they are, and every member owes them. So you can't just waive assessments. But there are some things you can do on the collection aspect of that for people who have fallen into financial difficulties. And I'll give you an example. So you could do a board resolution, and whatever you do, it needs to be in writing. It needs to be passed at a properly noticed board meeting through a resolution. So there's no confusion, and it can be easily enforced. But you could temporarily suspend late fees or the charging of interest, or you could have a stay from commencing the collection action with an attorney. You could do that for any member that can provide written proof that they had a business that was shut down, or they were furloughed, or they were laid off. I think most board members and managers know about selective enforcement. You can't treat people differently. But as long as your board resolution, your temporary policy for addressing people in this financial difficulty, as long as they apply to everybody equally, meaning all members have the opportunity for this reprieve or this temporary stay of collection, then it'll be okay, as long as you implement it equally to everybody. And so if you enact some type of board resolution like that for any member that can show evidence of them being laid off or whatever is going on in their life, that there will be a suspension from the collection aspect of assessments. And it could be for during the declared state of emergency, or it could be for 90 days, whatever the association wants to do. They'll be able to, if your board feels inclined to do something like that, then that is something that you do have the ability to do. And you also might want to consider, I've represented some associations where they have strict requirements on the payment plans that they'll accept for people who get behind. Some don't want to go further than 6 months. Some don't want to go further than a year. Some maybe 3 months. I mean, every association is different. But for this situation, you may want to consider loosening that up if you're one of the associations that likes to put a firm deadline on the length of payment plans for past due members. That might be something you also consider in your temporary policy to address this situation. I mean, it's not easy for anybody, but a lot of people who are in financial difficulty right now are in that situation, and it wasn't of their own making. It was something they had absolutely no control over. So you might want to just consider that as a board going forward, because it may not be a problem now, but it could be a problem 2, 3, 4 months down the line.
One of the things we did, Hans, recommending to our associations is, because we had this question a lot, should we stop sending, late letters? And the answer is, no, you have to send a late letter. You got to get in line. You got to let people know you need the money to keep the association going. You have a fiduciary to make that happen. So we're trying to give the residents as much information and as many resources as we possibly can. So with the late letter, that went out last month, we had a list of resources, where they could go, all the different government agencies, et cetera, that are resources for people who have, lost their job or had a business that closed, et cetera, et cetera. And then again, trying to communicate, with the residents about, the need for assessments and what they're going towards, and educating people so that they understand. They can't just go, well, it's tough times, to your point, when we first started out, and take advantage of the situation, right? It's all about educating people so they understand what their fees are really doing, which is protecting the association, protecting their property values, et cetera.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And you don't want to give the impression, because some members may not know or not understand, you don't want to give the impression that assessments aren't being levied at all right now, because they are. So you just want to, that's a great suggestion. Send out a communication, letting people know, hey, look, the budget is still in place, the assessments are still owed, and that is what helps us to run the place. Whether it's keeping the lights on, or keeping the security there, or the gates to the community, or whatever it is you have at your association. It might be good to send out a reminder and let your members know that there's not a waiver of these assessments. And then whether or not your association wants to implement some type of policy on collection, like we discussed, that's up to your association, and maybe that could be included in the communication as well. But it's really up to your association. Like I said, this is a case-by-case situation. Some associations may want to take advantages and do some of these things. Some may not, and that's fine. It's whatever. Every association has their own personality based upon their members and their board, and so that's fine. One other thing I wanted to touch on was the financial reporting, because I know the DBPR's order, at least for condominium associations, put a temporary stay on financial reporting. And so typically the statutes say that 90 days after your fiscal year, you've got to engage some type of professional, a CPA, whoever, to do your financial reporting for the prior fiscal year. And that report needs to be completed within 120 days of the end of that fiscal year. And then the DBPR's order put a stay on that, at least temporarily. And it's still in effect, but with businesses reopening now across the state, you may want to get ahead of the game, because I don't know how many have actually stayed and their financial reporting for the first 6 months of this year, or however long it's been. And when the DBPR order is over, there could be a mass need for getting this done for associations throughout the state. So just something to consider. You may want to get ahead of the ball there. And as businesses are reopening, go ahead and engage. If you took advantage of that stay and you weren't doing your financial reporting as required, you may want to go ahead and engage someone to do that now, before there's a run on all these people from all these associations that did stay it. So just something to think about there. That goes over a lot of the comments that I had planned to say today regarding the reopening of common elements and how to utilize the emergency rules and procedures and things like that, some things to consider. I tried my best to answer all the questions that were submitted ahead of time. Fiona, I don't know if there's any new questions that have come through.
I'm just scanning through here, so apologize. I'm looking away from the screen to see if we missed anything. We talked about elections. We talked about the ballots.
Yeah, I tried my best to, there was about 10 or 15 questions that came in ahead of time, and I tried my best to review them and tailor some of my comments to address them all. But, there was one question: should there be a staff member overseeing the common elements to clean them? Some associations have employees, some have several employees, some don't have any. They outsource everything, such as their manager or whoever. But if your association has the ability to do that, yeah, I'd say it would be a great idea to put someone in charge of, twice a day going around and at least cleaning the handles, cleaning the whatever it is in your association that has a lot of presence from people, whether touching, opening doors, counters, things like that. Yeah, I mean, it would be great to implement a policy where you have a staff member or someone go and twice a day wipe all that stuff down.
What we're seeing, Hans, is again, every association is different, but in the larger scale associations where there are staff, part of our reopening plan and with the COVID playbook is taking those staff members, and if they were, for example, I'm going to use the example of buttons in an elevator, right? So if they were cleaning the elevators before COVID, 4 times a day, now at a minimum, they're wiping the elevator buttons every hour, for example, depending on the volume of that particular property. Then we have some associations that may not, as Hans said, have any staff at all. And so, do they have to hire somebody full time just to wipe down the pool? And what we're seeing in some of those situations is, of course, check with your association attorney. But what we're seeing is, signage, as Hans mentioned, educating the residents that they're to bring their own cleaning supplies, et cetera, et cetera. And that's why it's so important prior to opening your amenities to get the written plan, put it together, kind of, walk through it, how it would actually work, and then sit down with your management team and your attorney and walk through it and make sure you've got yourselves covered.
Yeah, and there was another question that came through that where it was asked, are there any known legal actions that are filed right now against any associations? Mm-hmm. Not that I'm aware of. It's a county by county thing. I mean, if there's filed in state court, it would be in the county where your association is located. And I can't sit here and tell you that I know whether such actions have been filed in every county. The counties that I mainly practice in, I'm not aware of any. But a lot of my comments have been tailored around, and the point of what I was getting at is that if the worst case scenario happens and someone does fall ill to COVID-19 and it can be traced back to a common element event, then you got to expect that person may hire an attorney and file some type of personal injury lawsuit. I mean, I don't know, but it's a risk that everybody faces, right? So I can't tell you that I know of any. In the counties I practice, I'm not aware of any. But I mean, there's the statute of limitations for that will be years, and so it could happen. I mean, 6 months from now, you may hear of 1 or 2 where there have been a lawsuit filed by members against an association, and that really is the point of what I've been getting at, and that's the risk that you want to make sure that you're mindful of, and you want to limit that liability by doing a lot of the things that Fiona and I have discussed on this webinar. And as long as you're taking some precautionary measures, then you're going to have stuff to defend against that lawsuit. And I think the number one thing is just don't. If you have some loud voices in your membership that want all the common elements open right away, back to normal, you gotta make sure you don't give into that, and that you do it the right way, and that you follow the governor's orders, and that you're following the lead of the state. And then if you are reopening, you're doing it on a gradual basis, and you're doing as much as you can to ensure that you're limiting the risk and liability. Because while I'm not aware of any lawsuits, I mean, I think there's a pretty good bet that some will pop up over the course of time, whether it's later this year or next year. Hopefully not, but just that seems to be how it goes. And so you just want to make sure that you do the best you can to make sure your association isn't one of those that finds itself, in a lawsuit that they don't really have any defenses to.
Yeah, and so the title was Light at the End of the Quarantine Tunnel for today's webinar, but I think what we're all seeing is we'll continue to do these webinars because things will continue to evolve and change, and we find these webinars, we get a lot of great feedback. So Hans, thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate your time and your expertise. For those of you that have any other questions maybe that we didn't get to, again, feel free to email us at info@castlegroup.com. And we will absolutely follow up with you and make sure we get you with the right expert who can answer your question. Any parting words from your end, Hans?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Fiona and Gianna, and to the Council Group. I really appreciate it. I enjoyed this webinar very much, and hopefully, I hope those board members and managers or whoever is in attendance got some useful information out of it. Feel free to check out my firm's website. It's jimersonfirm.com. We have a very robust section on community associations, blog, and a lot of educational materials out there. So hopefully, there's some stuff on there that may provide you with some additional information during this time. But I want to thank everybody and thank the Council Group, and I wish everybody health and safety throughout the rest of this year.
Thanks, Hans. Take care. Have a great